Conversations with leading experts in enterprise resource planning. Evolving ERP. Powered by Insight Jam.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Evolving ERP. I'm your host as always, Ryan Daly, and we've got a great conversation lined up for you. Once again, we've got returning champion Judith O'Callahan leading a conversation with first-time guest, welcome to the show, Tom Pierce.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to have you. We're having a nice chat before the record here. And I'm excited about today's conversation because we're going to get into something that will help me in particular, and I think, by extension, a lot of people out there, especially if you're coming to ERP either directly or tangentially. We're going to get into the foundations of it a little bit. As Judith explained, the R in ERP, the resources. And maybe what ERP means and doesn't mean. I can only imagine, but this I imagine this is going to be very helpful for me as somebody who's trying to understand this stuff, getting bits of knowledge as I go along. These many weeks, months. I don't know. I'll have to check back. We're several months in, but maybe by the time we get to a year, I can go through the three letters and explain them. Judith can check my work. But Tom, since it is your first time on the show,
yes,
could you give us a little bit of your backstory, the origin story, the myth, to who you are, what got you into ERP?
I'll start with just what has become a mantra for me, and that is that I suffer from what some people would call a dissociative identity disorder. I have come from three different streams in my background, even from childhood to now, and the three streams have come together in some ways that I had no way to anticipate, which I will revisit when we start talking about the planning in P, because none of what happened to me in my life has truly been planned, at least not by me. The three streams. I come from very much a military family. My father was career Air Force. My uncle served in Vietnam and then went on to serve as a civil servant in at the Pentagon. My father, mother, and Uncle John are all buried at Arlington National Cemetery. The second stream was one of ministry. In fact, I officiated at all three of their memorial services. I felt a sense of call to ministry about 1 week after I accepted a scholarship from the U.S. Army for ROTC. So I had already committed to 4 years of education and 4 years at least of service when I sensed this call to ministry. And so I had a number of conversations vertically about how in the world do these two things fit together. And the short answer is not in the way I thought they would. Then comes the computer avenue, which I am much too old to have learned anything about computers in school, except for the fact that when I was in 8th grade, our math teacher converted part of her math room into a computer room because somebody donated a computer, not one you would envision, but the kind where you had to take half the room, block it off, raise the floor, lower the ceiling, air condition it, no keyboard, no monitor, lights, switches, cards, tapes. That's where I got fascinated with computers. That's the only formal education I've received in computers, but I've enjoyed teaching myself all along. Lo and behold, the first day I report for duty as an officer in the U.S. Army, I am told by my commanding officer, "Thank you, Lieutenant Pierce. Your services are not required here. You have been selected to join an analysis team on the other side of the base." So I go in and I become by far the youngest and least experienced member of an expert analytical team, including a lady that taught computer science at Georgia Tech, some brilliant people. And it just so happens that my boss had one of the very first desktop computers. I don't think we called them that then. It had a dust cover on it, and it was used only to print briefing slides. If you've ever seen an overhead projector, yes, that's how old I am. And I asked permission if I could use his computer to try to automate some of the more tedious tasks that my coworkers were doing on, yes, the word spreadsheet once meant a 4-foot by 8-foot piece of paper spread out on an oak table with adding machines and pencil sharpeners at the ready. And so I learned how to use the computer to automate tedious, repetitive, computational tasks in the early 80s. And that led to, fast forward, uh, one day apart, I accepted a pastorate of a church in a small town not far from where I went to seminary. And the very next day, began my first day at work on my first contract, running my own software business. So I was bivocational through the duration. And in the computer part of the business, I ended up working for the Department of Defense in all, either directly or indirectly. So all three streams have been merging. And then I met Judith, where she has the boldness and has led a movement of boldness where speaking about business, speaking about information, speaking about value is very deeply rooted in faith propositions and core values. And I see that as very much a part of the current place, critical point we are in enterprise information and where we're headed. And so it's just been a gift to be able to collaborate with someone, halfway across the world, completely different backgrounds. I think she speaks English better than I do, at least the King's English, because, Americans mess it up. But we have found such common ground and common purpose from very different perspectives about what ERP means, doesn't mean, can do, and is becoming.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Tom. That is why I like to ask that question, is because nobody has remotely the same answer. Like I always say, no one went to, no one took the AP ERP test and went to ERP University and just went right into
That's
it.
exactly right.
Yeah.
It would be easier,
It
right?
was what I wanted to be
Yeah.
when I grew up. So
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you were, with all the talk of agentic AI going on, it sounds like you were building your own back in the 80s, organic AI maybe, but sort of on agentic automation. But Judith, we of course have you to thank for bringing Tom on the show. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I'll get out of your way and let this conversation kick off. So have fun.
thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. So, Tom, let's get cracking. So, let's go back to the very beginning of the beginning. So, in the beginning, let's talk about resource planning. So, we all talk about resource planning, and we know this term is not new. Squirrels have done it. Like in the nature, we see a lot of resource planning. So, what's your take on resource planning as one of the thought leaders in the MRP space?
That's very kind of you to put it that way. I'm actually going to take you one step further back to when it was called material requirements planning. So we're back in the 60s, and there's some debate of whether it began at Black & Decker or Case Tractor, but in the very beginning days of people using computers to compute and not just to send messages and write documents. That before the introduction of the computing power, all inventory records were manual, all bills of material were pencil and paper, well guarded. And some early founders got the idea that it would be really helpful to use the computer to keep track of the bills of material, the inventory positions, and the projected needs. And this is where I think one of the earliest myths grew up. And that myth is that MRP is the same thing as just in time. And it isn't, and it never was. But the concept of just in time added significant value to people who knew no other way to keep enough on hand than to fill the bin to the same level it was before. And so once material requirements planning took hold, about a decade or two later, you get people like Oliver White coming along, just teaching and writing and being an evangelist for going beyond just the what do you need to buy, but all of the resources. And the second one is easily the labor. You get material and labor. So how many hours are there in a week? Well, been a very busy man, so I happen to know there's 168 of them, and I have allocated my time through every mechanism I know, computer, whatever. But the allocation of human resources, available labor, overtime, when do you hire, when do you lay off? That became like the second resource in the manufacturing resource planning. So that's when we kick into, all right, how do you truly insert digital technology into human process? So my favorite analogy, and I've heard you share many similar ones, many more ancient ones, but my favorite analogy is if you look at two places, if you look in your own pantry and then you go to the grocery store closest to you and look at the shelves. So the pantry is probably going to be restocked to a normal level. How much sugar, how much flour, always 3 jars of peanut butter minimum, right? You don't want to run out of peanut butter. That my dad said that was the only grounds for divorce if we ever ran out of peanut butter. Um, but then some people will do their meal planning a week or two or a month ahead of time. And now you go back a century or two when the trip to the grocery store was a monthly or quarterly trip. Now you're trying to figure out, plan ahead. How much will I need to prepare the meals I need? But now you're combining the forecasting of demand with the replenishment based on historical usage. And then comes the unplanned event. You turn on the TV or the radio and you hear that snow is coming, and you're not sure the stores are going to be accessible, so you buy more. And that's when just in time becomes just in case. And I think if you take those three models, that replenish based on historical knowledge, instinct. My wife and I go through a grocery store and she just knows what we need, and I'm sitting there just overwhelmed, and I'm just picking stuff that looks good. But you got the historical human knowledge of what you need. You've got the ability to use technology to do more sophisticated planning, but then you've also got the uncertainty that gets factored in. And now, being a mathematician, I get fascinated by the statisticians that get involved and start talking about things like not just the standard deviation, but the coefficient of variance and the risk factors, and what is the economic order quantity, and how many do you really want to have in that pantry on yourselves. One funny story that came from one of these statisticians, one of these conferences, and I'll turn it back over to you. But I don't know if this phenomenon was global. I think it was, but it was certainly throughout the US, that when the COVID pandemic hit and everybody started staying at home instead of going to the office, there was an incredible shortage, not of toilet paper, but specifically of residential toilet paper, because the mix of residential versus commercial, completely different process,
Really
completely
difference.
different setup. It changed radically. So all of the supply chain globally had this, overabundance of commercial grade and was just running out of the residential grade. Well, what was more comical, I mean, that was tragic and we survived it somehow. But on the other end, coming out of the pandemic, when people started, getting out of the house again, well, all of the really smart statisticians had forecasted, ah, so now the demand, is going to reverse. But then they found that they were overstocking the residential toilet
Mm.
paper despite the demand. And this brilliant, insightful person at the Conference of Chicago said, it took us a while, but we figured out where all the toilet paper was that we weren't accounting for. It
Exactly.
was in the linen closets at homes.
Yep.
People had stocked up twice or three times as much as they needed, so it was going to be a while. So that was that invisible resource, right? It's a lot of people talk about supply chain. There's also a demand chain,
Yeah.
where are you living between these two extremes of uncertainty between supply and demand? And I think that's where the technology, I'm going to say, accelerates and amplifies.
Mm.
Because if we're making stupid decisions, computers allow us to make them faster
Oh, yeah. We
and
do it
spread them
faster,
more.
right? Exactly.
Want more Insight Jam? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for shorts, panels, podcasts, and more. In your shorts feed, enjoy a daily dose of best practices from tech experts and leading solution providers, while long-form panel discussions and keynotes, recorded live every quarter, go deep on important industry topics. And don't miss our collection of regular podcasts, keeping you informed on the latest trends. We're hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so subscribe to be notified of our next upload. Now, let's get back to the show.
So this is interesting, right? So when I was taught the ERP, it came down to three very simple things: people, places, and things. So how you balance these is what we do, and that's how the world runs, isn't it?
Exactly.
Mm.
Now, I think one of the other myths, and I'm going to just insist on calling it a myth. I might be in a very small population, but there is a myth that ERP is just MRP expanded to cover all of the resources of an enterprise, not just the manufacturing ones. I say it's a myth because that's not really what happened. What really happened, and I've lived through it, and number of people around, read the books, all of that, is that when the manufacturing people, the production people, the supply chain people were busy predicting and forecasting and managing stockage levels and all of this, the finance people saw an opportunity and maybe even felt left out of the planning. And there's an old saying that again got accelerated and amplified by technology, that information is power. Well, if information is power, then you want to be the one controlling the information if you want to have the power. But, more graciously, all these decisions being made about buying more of something just in case cost money.
Mm.
So the finance people need to be involved when you're saying, I can improve my customer satisfaction, I can improve my production efficiency, I can always be sure I have plenty on the warehouse. All I need is a blank check with no limit, a credit card that's all I need. And if companies are willing to spend millions and millions of dollars to buy 10 times what they think they need, then yes, they're going to significantly reduce the risk of running out. But at what cost?
Mm.
So the financial people got involved, but as financial people tend to do, where they're involved, they kind of want to take charge. And so I think that the transition from MRP, really MRP2, the resource planning, to ERP was more about the involvement and even control mechanisms that came from finance organizations to try to rein in the cost, schedule, quality dynamic that occurred because of MRP and MRP2. Kind of a funny thing I noticed, and I wish I could remember the guy's name, but it is very informative but also humorous presentation about all the different acronyms we've used through the years and how they, represent subtleties like that. So one of the branches that grew up was sales and operations planning. And that's when, your salespeople are
Mhm.
selling more than what your production people can build, and they don't like it, so they theoretically get together and coordinate. Well, they also left out the finance people in talking about sales and operations people meetings. So Finance comes up with their own version of it called integrated business planning, and the only difference is they're in charge. So, he who holds the gold rules or something like that. The I
It's
do think that's a huge part of the reason when a lot of people talk about ERP these days, they're actually not talking about the planning of
yeah.
resources. They're talking about the managing of finances.
Exactly. So it's interesting, right? So it brings us to slightly the interesting topic of you've seen the evolution of ERP from the 60s to now, and you can predict where it's going in the future. So based on what I have seen, we moved from a very what do you call very paper based, very decentralized model to a centralized model in
Yes,
the
sir.
80s and 78. Our best friend Jan Ban, who came up with those concept of
Exactly.
uniting that technology, and then we built on it, and now we are going the other way because there is this big curve of working through the centralization, creating that monolith ERP and the time for monolith ERP, and now we are going the other way because not everything can do everything right. So it's like what is as an observer for a very long time in this space, and also having run businesses that have supported world's major defense organizations. What is your take on the trends that you're observing there?
Oh, thank you for asking, and that's a wonderful setup for that. I see a pattern that you've described very well, but that is actually common across an awful lot of fields of human behavior. I ran across it in military strategy. I've run across it in religious organizations, and I strive to be a passionate moderate. So when I touch on controversial topics like religion and politics and military strategy, have always sought to understand both edges of the dynamic and even the anger, fear, and hatred that sometimes boils up in the midst of those conflicts. But one of the most insightful comments I ever heard was actually from one of my commanding generals way up the chain of command, who said that he envisioned the military of the future as being more like a soccer game and football the way the rest of the world knows it, and less like an American football game. So in American football, it's like trench warfare, like the trenches in France and Germany during the World Wars, and much more decentralized with small little battles for position and space, much more the way European or global soccer is played, football. And I think we've seen that same pattern where those who want power want control, and the impulse, not always a good one, but the impulse is to centralize. You've certainly seen churches of multiple, faiths, synagogues, multiple denominations. There are some who seek centralized power, and there are some who seek to enable and equip decentralized execution. And what this commanding general wrote in a one-page handwritten doodle that he actually mimeographed, for those old enough to remember that term, and sent out to everybody in his command was the question, with all the little drawings that went with it. How do we centralize command and decentralize execution? And I think that's what we're going through right now in the enterprise information business. No question, the information needs to flow to the people at the top. Well-informed leaders make better decisions. They need to know the truth. I think it might have been Gartner recently that came out with a study that said only 6% of bad news makes it to the C-suite, that everybody in between has an incentive to don't tell them that I could lose my job, to buffer it, to pad it, whatever. So, the transparency of information from the granular data input all the way to the summation of the business intelligence is essential, but that's not enough to run the entire global enterprise from the penthouse of the headquarters building in New York City or Hong Kong. So that the ability to take that information and decentralize the execution I think is the revolution that we're in the middle of now. That one monolithic system on one platform in some cloud, not sure which one, um, is going to tell us all what to do. And the only way that we will all be, wealthy, wise, and prosperous is to do as we're told by the computer in the cloud. That is just not working. Decisions need to be made, tweaked, adapted, improvised at much lower levels. And I think that's very frightening to people who, you know, have sought power, gained power, are responsible for managing the whole enterprise well. But this is true in churches, it's true in the military, it's true in communities, it's true in families. You know, when do you trust your children with the car keys? And I think Jan is a huge part of that decentralizing movement. You know, get the centralized information in one spot, but then give lower, I even hate to say lower level, more distributed decision makers the information they need, the power they need, the authority they need, the resources they need to make decisions.
And this is an interesting take on it, right? So, when we look at the evolution that we have seen in the ERP and the ERP world, so it started with empowering the individuals with a job to be done, like
Yes.
those who were with the spreadsheets, and then empowering the decision makers. We did that really well. And then at some point, it went on to controlling. So, controlling everything centrally and managing everything centrally, everybody being told to do what the cloud tells us to do or what the machine tells us to do. And then now we are back into being empowered to do the job that needs to be done. So we've pretty much gone a full circle
Right.
with
But
our mindset. Mhm.
and I love this that I picked up from one of my advisors a long time ago, that when you say full circle, I agree wholeheartedly if you're looking at it in 2 dimensions.
Yep.
But if you're looking in 3 dimensions, we're spiraling
Yeah.
upward.
Yeah,
We're
which is good.
we're
Yeah.
repeating the same pattern in this plane, but we're growing in our knowledge and understanding. And you've heard me say before that I came into adulthood at a time where we were trying to figure out how to insert digital intelligence into predominantly human processes, and now we've completely flipped to the opposite problem. Where do we want human intelligence inserted into essentially digital processes?
And that is again very very interesting, right? So when we look at our next way of thinking or next level of thinking, how fast do we expect the ERP or the ERP as we know today to change in the future? So,
Yeah.
like based on what we are seeing, are we looking at more decentralized ones or even different ones? Like one of the things that I was surprised to note was most emergency departments in the hospitals still run out of Excel sheets and
Yes.
they fail, right?
Yes.
So when we talk about real places where we
Right.
can help humans get better, like no better place than emergency departments.
So a couple of things there. First, a personal story. And it cuts deep. So I'm going to be open. You've heard me tell this before. Um, my wife's mother passed away a few years ago, and we knew that she was sick for many years, but she was very private and revealed very little about the nature and scope of her illness. She declined very rapidly, and at one point she was in the hospital, and a doctor was seeing her, and he was aware that there were some test results from a scan that he wasn't at liberty to share with the family, and she wasn't, awake and aware enough to give permission. And then another doctor visits who had seen her before, and he had different access through a different computer, through a different healthcare network, that he was not allowed to share with the doctor that was taking care of her because of the boundaries of HIPAA and everything else. So both of these doctors knew things that they couldn't share with each other, and neither of them had permission to share with us. So we're still in the dark. And now, I do have kind of a dark sense of humor, but as things got worse and she had to be transported to a larger hospital in a major city, we finally found a sympathetic physician who said he would get that data and give it to us. So he just defiantly, he's ready to risk his job because he's just so frustrated by how crazy this is. So he turns to his, little desktop computer system there, and he tries to log on to it, and they've just put in a new software system. So he's trying to navigate this new software system that he hasn't been trained on yet. He knows the information we need is in there, and he can't figure out how to get it. So that was hard. Now, it was a couple of days later that they finally sorted that out, and the results and the scans showed indeed her cancers had spread much more widely than any of us had suspected, and she did not live many days beyond that. But coming from the perspective of both from the pastoral care perspective and the computer perspective and just, human perspective of if anybody ought to have information at their fingertips, it ought to be the physician in a life and death situation. Now, I want to challenge you on another point, though, and I want to challenge you everybody in my network of LinkedIn friends. Please quit dismissing the value of Microsoft Excel workbook. If he had had that information in an Excel workbook, we would have known about it instantly. Don't use a Microsoft Excel workbook as a database. Use it as a reporting tool. Use it as an analytical tool. Use it as a way of sharing information with each other. To me, when I hear people say quit using Excel, I feel like they're telling me to quit use a pen and paper.
That's never going to happen. No,
it's not going to happen.
no.
And I was even at a plant where the head of IT told us they were going to take Microsoft Excel off of everybody's computer so that we weren't allowed to use it anymore. It's like, and what you going to take my calculator? You're going to take my adding machine? I've actually got an abacus and I know how to use it. I misplaced Dad's slide rule, but come on, use whatever tools you need to use, but don't misuse. Don't drive the screwdriver with a hammer.
Exactly.
There are things that Excel is not cut out to handle, and running your whole business is one of them. But it has its place. So.
Exactly.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day. Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, NextThing.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads. And contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
So the evolution of technology, as we talk about it, either Excel or monolith ERPs or
Right.
whatever it is, all of them have its place. And we know, between both of us, we know of organizations, we talk about healthcare or utilities or anyone who literally run their companies out of Excel, but they use their monolith ERP to record. So we've swapped the roles of both the systems. For example, in Excel, we expect it to be a reporting tool or not as a database, a reporting tool, and the other one to be an operational tool, but we have swapped things. And We've done that to a lot of other technologies as well. Like a few things were invented for different purposes and we use it for different purposes and many aspects. So, which
Right.
leads us into pondering on how do we see ERP going in the next
Exactly.
10,
Exactly.
5 years?
So I've got to pick up on what you just said and
Mm.
use that to launch
Yeah.
into the answer. So this thing that I'm holding up in front of the camera, I'm quite sure you recognize it and you know what we call it, right? What do we call this device?
A cell phone,
A phone,
mobile
right?
phone. Yeah. Mm.
How often do you use it as a phone as opposed to a messaging device, a map, a a research tool? This is a handheld
1%?
computer.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is a handheld computer. The phone part of it is a little piece of, a little tiny piece of whatever it is, tip foil aluminum that's about a quarter-inch square, and you can take it down to your provider and they'll replace it almost for free. The phone piece of this is tiny, but we're going to still call it a phone, even though what most people are paying for is the camera,
Yeah.
because that's where the money is in the
Mm.
camera. So I think that's going to continue to happen. We're going to continue to call things what they used to be and use them for what we need them to be. And I think that creates a period of great confusion. We're going to keep calling it ERP when we're really talking about a financial system that does inventory. And we're going to keep referring to things, like spreadsheet, as if it were the 8 foot by 4 feet. We're going to keep referring to things by the language we know because it's actually the language. And for you've told me how many languages you speak. I know it's quite a few, but you understand what lost in translation. You know the difficulty of translating from one to the other. But the more we become disconnected, the more we fragment ourselves over language, I think that is one of the greatest new challenges as this technology spreads and replicates. And what's the old mitosis, meiosis in cellular biology? They differentiate, right? A cell replicates and then makes itself different than the one before. Sort of like my brother and I just had to do everything different so we wouldn't be associated with each other. So all these technologies, as much as we would all like them to standardize and play well together in the sandbox, their incentive is what Jan keeps referring to, is to lock you in,
Mm.
to lock you into a piece of software, to an operating system, to a platform, they want your devotion. They want your pledge of loyalty to their brand. And I think we're going to be constantly fighting that, how come when my friend sends me a spreadsheet from his iPhone, I can't read it on my Android because they don't have the same spreadsheet software. So we're going to be in this battle of diversification, which is a part of the dissemination, but also collaboration so that we can still understand and communicate with each other. And I'll give you my just my intro to where I think we're headed with AI. My greatest fear is that the enthusiasm about artificial intelligence is going to suck all the air out of the room, and people are going to quit talking or caring about human intelligence and treat humans more and more like robots, as we used to say. Well, we treat robots more and more like brilliant, sentient, wise, Mount Olympus
Humans.
proclamations. Exactly. And I hope we see, as you have let out, a resurgence in the value of wisdom gained over centuries and millennia across cultures, across many collaborations. So if I was going to condense that, right, I've got a little device behind me called Alexa, which is Amazon's, voice recognition. So when Alexa answers me, I heard what you said, but I think I know what you meant. Then I'll know we've
Exactly.
made an advance. And when I'm trying to type a text message, and it thinks I know what I'm trying to type, it's almost always wrong. So we have a long ways to go to do the ancient things, establish trust, build shared values, have a common vision. I'm not even sure, it's not even easy to talk about those things when you're talking about objects.
Mm.
But if we really want to talk about artificial intelligence, we can't just ignore. Are we talking about artificial morals, artificial ethics, artificial values? Are we concerned about you do know that most people hate the computer systems they're required to
Oh
use.
yeah.
And
Who
and
loves
hate's a
them? Yeah.
strong word. If that was a coworker, they wouldn't talk to a coworker the way they
Yep.
talk to their inanimate computers.
Mm.
So I think there's just a very long way to go to build trust in the relationships. I actually think there's probably an emerging field of psychology that is, maybe even sociology, that will deal with human and digital relationships. Let me help you
Mm.
over your fear. In fact, one of the plants I was at that implemented SAP, they actually hired a PhD in psychology to help people overcome the emotional resistance to the fear that this piece of technology makes me incompetent. It
Mm.
makes me confused. It breaks my relationships with the people I used to work with every day. It changes everything about what I like about work. And you not only expect me to adopt it, you expect me to pretend I like it. So, this is not change management doesn't cover it. There's a
Exactly. This is far more than that, right? So you
yes,
you brought a beautiful point to the surface. So when we look at it purely logically, 95% of the world's transactions run on ERP, irrespective of the technology behind it. So, what it brings to the surface is the need to collaborate, need to work together on shared values, and need to be able to rise beyond the manual constraints and work beyond things like vendor lock in and all sorts of constraints that we humans have built around it. So,
right,
if we keep building more constraints and barriers, we are hindering ourselves and our development into the future. So 95% of world's transactions is not a simple number. So most of what we do needs an ERP. The grocery store needs an ERP in place or some sort of technology to be in place. So, and the delivery guy needs it, and half the stuff that we order needs it, and all that stuff. So, it's about us being conscious of what we choose to do and conscious of the boundaries and the barriers. While boundaries are healthy, barriers are not healthy. So, we humans need to constantly evaluate the importance of human intelligence and insert it where it's needed most. So,
right.
and I'm sure you agree with me on that philosophy on we have evolved so much and we have got so much at the moment in our disposal in terms of technology and everything else. So now it's a matter of how do we set ourselves for success in the future?
Yes. And I do believe much as you would talk about a human relationship, right? Counseling a young couple getting ready to get married, you have to think long term. This is a process. Human, digital, working together, becoming familiar. And just the AI is working just as hard, if not harder than you are, to understand your voice and your tone and your intent. So it truly is a relationship and a network of relationships that need to be allowed space and time to grow and mature because, you force it and you'll get resistance every time.
Absolutely. And how do we leave? Do we have words of wisdom for the younger generation who are looking to follow our footsteps in making this world better?
You don't have to discard the wisdom of the ages to embrace the innovation of youth. I think the multi-generational families and the multi-generational cultures learned that a long time ago. I know that we in the West have allowed that to erode dramatically. And it applies just as much to ancient technologies as it does to ancient humans.
Very wise.
Yes, very well said. Thank you so much, Tom, for coming on the show. And I feel like I'm jumping in too early, but this is, about as long as we normally go, but I feel like we could just keep going. We'll have to have you back on the show because I feel like there's so much more to discuss.
Enjoyed it very much.
I love the thought about, as AI is coming in, often it does feel so adversarial, like it's something being foisted upon you. You need to take it, and
I'm taking my job.
coming from the media side of things, the visual arts, so many of my peers are, I will never touch AI. All AI is bad. It's taking my job. And there's a lot of AI slop out there. It's just bad visuals, but it can also be a very helpful thing to relieve, I'm speaking personally, relieve myself of a lot of the drudgery of the arts and allow myself to be more creative. So having that, going back to ancient wisdom, balance in all things, the Aristotelian ideal, I think, is something to take along with that. So let's see, Tom, where can people, if people were stimulated by this conversation, I hope that you were, if you're still listening, where can people go to learn more about you and communicate with you?
So my company name is I2S, the letter I, the digit 2, letter S, and it's .us because .com was owned by somebody else who wanted too much money. So I am Tom at i2s.us. And if you just go to our website at i2s.us, you can learn more about me and about our products and services and company, etc. I do most of my communication through LinkedIn, and you can find me there as well.
We'll have all of that down in the description. Judith, where should people look for you and for what you're doing?
Easiest is LinkedIn. Hit me out.
Judith is a frequent poster on there, so do check her out right down there. And of course, while you're down there, go ahead and, there's some cryptic logos down there. Maybe one looks like this, maybe one, I can't do a bell with my hand quite as easily as a hand, but press those. You'll want to be staying informed of all of the new content that we have right here on Evolving ERP and on the Insight Jam channel. So if you're interested in any kind of enterprise resource planning or enterprise technology in general, the AI conversation, we have so much content on that, a lot of great thinkers on our show. So do check those out. And if you hit that button, it'll let you know when we're posting, and we're posting all the time. So do check that out. So for Tom Pierce, for Judith O'Callahan, I've been Ryan Daly. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next Evolving ERP.
Powered by Insight Jam.